Here and welcome up our biggest panel of the day, which is our family office investment panel. And we're going to get to know a lot more. We got a chance to take a deep dive with the Hobans earlier. This is going to be more of the quick format. And so welcome up, guys. Hopefully a few of you got mic'd up. The rest of you, I've got some mics up here for. Daniel, welcome. Great to have you guys here. Wolfgang.
Just move it forward.
Alan, welcome. It is, it should be. So just make sure those are turned on, and we'll go ahead and keep going and dive into it here. We're going to spend the next hour to get to know each of our panelists here and hear a little bit about their background. Some of them are single-family offices, and they represent themselves, just like the Hobans did earlier today. Some of them are multifamily in that they're an advisor. They work for several family offices and provide support and structure in that regard. And so we'll get a chance to kind of learn a little bit about how that dynamic works between single-family, multifamily, single families working together to share opportunities, but really trying to just provide a little more color commentary on the different types of investment entities that are out there. Some that were very organized when they were structured, some that just happened to kind of pick it up as they went along, and as they look back at it, they realized that they had become a family office without necessarily having that intention to begin with. So we'll have each panelist just spend 2 or 3 minutes introducing themselves and talking about their background and their experience, and get a chance to welcome everybody. So we're very pleased. Colin, you want to get us started here, get us kicked off, share a little bit about your background and investment strategy?
Sure. Thank you, Leon. Thanks for inviting me here. My name is Colin Wallace. I am a habitual serial entrepreneur and have been for some time. I originally immigrated into the U.S. in 1980 on the basis where you had to buy a business and then hire yourself to run the business under an L1 visa. And that was my entree into the American capital system, and I've been in it ever since. Subsequent to that, I had one, and most of the companies that I have built, by the way, have been based out of the Pacific Northwest in the Seattle area. The first company I built here was an automotive service company. I ran it and built it over 10 years. I sold it in 1990, and at that point in time is when I decided I needed to form some kind of a structure for the capital. Formed Lionheart Holdings, Inc., which was fundamentally and still is a sub-S corp. And from that, 4 or 5 companies later, all of those companies are still structured under that sub-S at this point. Above that sub-S has now been put in place a family trust, which has been organized to control the assets now under management by Lionheart Holdings. But I have set up C Corps, LLCs. You know, I did a company here in a partnership with Seattle's Best Coffee, which we ran out successfully and exited on that one. I also did another C Corp, which is a trading company. In fact, I don't know if you were in I asked Mark about the trading business and his insight into that, because we have an artificial intelligence-based algorithm system out of Nevada that is basically self-trading at this point, which has kind of hit the wall on a returns basis. You know, I did a company in a partnership structure that's now operating a business. The company's name is Wireless Advocates. It basically operates as Costco Mobile. We do all the mobile business inside Costco. We do similar business for internet data in Walmart called Walmart Internet on the Go, and a bunch of other companies. So they all basically fell under Lionheart Holdings in a form of C Corps. And the really reason that I formed that family holding structure was Well, first of all, a couple of divorces later, the idea struck me that it was probably a good idea to mitigate risk at that point. And I did. And also to mitigate taxes. Just for point of reference, I actually am a resident of the state of Florida, which is a tax-free state that happens to have palm trees, which is another lifestyle requirement I developed. So I currently operate between Los Angeles, Marina del Rey, and Miami on a bi-coastal basis, and have been doing businesses and involved in businesses throughout the country. My primary objective at that point is I really wanted to mitigate risk, and so I was forming corporations that were C Corps or LLCs in states like Wyoming, where risk mitigation has become probably one of their biggest source of capital over there. And I also want to mitigate taxes. It was just easier to flow taxes through corporations that would, take all of the benefits and subsidies that are available to be able to mitigate that tax situation. So that's what I've been doing, and so functionally, I guess I am a family office. I am involved in a new company now. Just actually, I'm wearing two shirts today because we're presenting again tomorrow because I'm, as I said, a habitual serial entrepreneur, and also simply because my lawyers have told me that I either had to stop retiring or stop marrying, and I decided to stop retiring. It seems to work out better for me. So that's my background.
Thanks so much, Colin. Go down. I think the mic is on, but I'm not hearing. Okay. I'll speak in this loudness and it'll be fine. I did not think I had or operated a family office until I got asked to come to this panel discussion. I have a long history as an investor in public equities in the 1990s while I was working at Oracle and Oracle Japan, in startups in Tokyo since Oracle Japan was taken public as a semi-spin-off in 1999. And I ended up with a lot more money than I expected ever to have in my life when we wired $8 billion to Larry from Tokyo in '99. And out of that, having grown up a Mormon in Utah, the Seattle philanthropic bent totally makes sense to me. Wanting to use your wealth for that, I think is perfectly good. But I also realized early on that unless I was continuing to create additional assets, that the money would run out at some point. What I did was move back from Oracle headquarters in Menlo Park, where I ended my time with Oracle, back to Tokyo, where I spent most of my career with Oracle, in the middle of the internet bubble, because like Seattle then, and to some degree even today, Tokyo was incredibly underserved in terms of startup capital. People from outside the financial industry understood entrepreneurship, understood technology, and could make good, hands-on, smart investment decisions and help the startup community. So I started Sunbridge in 2000 as my way to give back to Japan through investing in Japanese startups. And hired some of my ex-Oracle colleagues. I think if you put it in family office talk, I hired the smartest guy that worked with me at Oracle to run the investment part of the shop. Because labor mobility was a big issue in Tokyo then, we thought we'd probably have to have a technical team that could help startups who had no technical background address the technical aspects of their business creation, and the sales and marketing team to help the engineers who never talked to a customer in their lives figure out how to take the product they built and move it to the market. So we started something with an investment arm, a technical services arm, a go-to-market services arm, and a big, huge office in the middle of Tokyo where all of our startups could get together in a space at kind of at the peak of the internet bubble when Idea Labs and CJ, all of the internet incubator nonsense was going on here. We created one of a very small handful that have survived from 1999 to today with that kind of very integrated full-service model for engaging with startups.
And I suppose you could call it a family office because the source of capital to it was the outcome of the Oracle Japan IPO for me. Along the way, one of the first things my first assistant did is because I hadn't filed my U.S. taxes for 2 years, and as a CEO in Japan, if you ever had an issue about not paying taxes, no one will ever do business with you ever again. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to hire you a tax accountant to take care of that for you. So the second step in the family office after hiring my colleague for investments was my assistant helping me hire a financial assistant to work with the accountants to make sure I filed my taxes every year. And then as we had more access, I started thinking about why do I keep a house in California? I should maybe, even today, move to Seattle or Vancouver, next door where our daughter's in college in Portland. But step by step, the investment has always been very much about what I think is a smart investment, and I've tried to stay pretty close to IT, because that's the space that I know. Over time, I thought, I'd really like to be able to invest directly in IPOs, and the only way I could do that was to finally entrust the money to Goldman Sachs or Nikko Securities, because I couldn't get into the IPO itself without an arrangement with a big investment banker. Later on, I had been hearing about hedge funds while they were still emerging, and I had an ex-Goldman Sachs friend who was doing a fund of hedge funds. I put some money with him to discover, like many of you may have, that I could have done a better job by giving the money to Warren Buffett. Buying his stock on the public market back in 2007 would have produced better returns than my portfolio of hedge funds. And now I'm at an age where I'm finally, my wife has been bugging about life insurance forever and where are all these assets when we do it. And I'm finally at the stage where I'm engaging an investment advisor, letting them take part of my assets in exchange for helping me go through the process of setting up a trust and dealing with the issues. And because my children don't want to talk about finances, I figure if I get an advisor, maybe my children will engage in the process of thinking about what we do with the wealth, what impact we have as I move on and becomes their generation. If there are professional advisors outside the family, they can have a conversation with without feeling like it's mom and dad telling them what to do. So I'm kind of at the stage now where I'm moving from a corporate structure. We're still very active in Japan. We bring companies, brought Salesforce and Concur from Seattle and Marketo. We brought a few companies from the U.S. to help them get their businesses going in Japan, like we did with Oracle back in the day. So that's part of the business that we do. But I'm now at the stage where I will be setting something up for estate planning purposes and for the future after me as an active investor, active manager of the assets, and kind of giving up some of the control in order to get some institutional instruction for the kids. I'm just now beginning the process. I'm here as much to learn today as share. That's me. And
So-
as usual, it was longer than I expected.
Well, you guys got a lot going on for sure, and thank you so much, Colin, Alan, getting us started. Wolfgang is unfortunate, one of our most successful Keiretsu-backed company CEOs, and now finds himself also representing and working with family offices. I think it's a great example of how our Keiretsu members can be very supportive and engage with family offices. Wolfgang, I'd love for you to share a little bit more about kind of how you came to be in that position and where it is now, and maybe a little bit about where you think it could go.
Yeah, thank you very much. So my name is Wolfgang Daum. It's a very German name. You go to Germany and say Wolfgang, everybody comes. I came 17 years ago to the United States. I started a company in Germany which I sold to Boston Scientific. Had found myself with golden handcuffs, as they called it. Started another company, set up one other companies, which Keiretsu invested, was very, very successful. And I became a Keiretsu investor myself. I became an investor in Launchpad. I'm still running companies, just like Colin. I cannot leave the business. I enjoy that very much. And I had several investors and family office invested in me. And so I was asked them at some point to look at some of their investments, especially startup investments in healthcare. That's really my world. I don't know anything else than healthcare and early stage. And so I did some investments for them where I invested, they invested, we did it as SPVs, special purpose vehicles, and they also were quite successful. So I was then asked to come into this group, Carlyle Global, which is not to be confused with the asset management group out of Washington. There are 12 companies in the financial field with the name of Carlyle. Nobody has a trade name for that. And so what I'm doing right now, I'm helping them identify early stage healthcare companies to invest in. I do the entire due diligence. I sit typically then on the board. And somebody said it earlier today, You're looking for CEOs which can be trusted and can be coached. I find that one of the most important parts of the entire investment strategy. So I have two legs. One is still an entrepreneur. One is more in the investment world, and I enjoy that very much. So I'm also, you could call me a family office, although I would say I'm a nano family officer myself. So I work with several other families where we do investments, and I do only healthcare and early stage.
Thanks so much, Wolfgang. Daniel, thank you for getting on a plane and coming out here as well. I'd love for you to share a little bit about your background, and you come from the financial services world and then into this crazy entrepreneurial world. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about your journey and how you got here.
So I started very young, 21 years old. I worked in London for Riggs AP Bank. I don't know if you remember Riggs Bank in DC. They had a private equity group in London, and I actually was in college doing customer service, and I always wanted to go to London. So I said, I'd like to work with you guys. Graduating, you get this job. So like, phew. I went over there to the interview, was great. I learned a lot about subscription agreements and evaluating different deals, and that was fun. And we did an investment in a Belgian race car theme park, so to speak. It was interesting. It didn't do well, but it was interesting. We had a lot of interesting deals. From there, I went to work at Bear Stearns, came back to New York, worked in the media entertainment group, worked on the Paramount Viacom deal, worked on the Caraco evaluation of the assets. Caraco is the company that produced Terminator and Rambo franchise. So we evaluated those assets and sold them off to United Artists. Worked with Bell Atlantic, which is now Verizon. So I worked at Bear Stearns in that group right when digital compression was starting to become a thing. If you remember, we used to have about maybe 100 channels at that time, and now we have over 1,000. So that was that thing, and so content was going to be king in the next couple of years. I actually ended up working in the music business for a while, and I actually did not want to do finance. I'm working too hard. I'm too young. I just want to have fun. I want to meet girls. I want to buy CDs. I want to go to free concerts. I want to get like a little salary. That's one of my own business. So I went into work for Puffy, or they call him Diddy. I don't know what they call him these days. But I worked with him for 7 years. Great experience. I worked in business affairs, did more deals, negotiating with artists, producers, record companies, advances for loans, and I tried to hide my finance background as much as possible until one of the artists came to me and said, Dan, how do I get a mortgage? And I was like, what are you asking me for? I'm the music business guy. Why are you asking me? Yeah, but I heard you just work at Bear Stearns. So how do I get a mortgage? I said, listen, I don't work at Bear Stearns anymore. I'm a music business person. I work for Puffy. If you need money for recording, or you need an advance or something, I can help with that. But don't you have a business manager? I'm like, yeah, but these guys don't know anything. And I asked them, and they told me, this guy, that guy. So I was like, well, can you do me a favor? Can you not just tell people that you heard of? So that didn't work out too well. I'm at a big magazine conference. Puffy is the keynote speaker, and he's like, you're not going to believe what I just heard. There's a guy that works for me that used to be an investment banker, and he's sitting right there. Dan, stand up. Can you believe this? My company is so great, I have guys quitting their jobs to work for me at these big Wall Street firms. And I'm like, this is great. So now all these artists are asking me for advice. How to get a mortgage, how to fix credit, little foxes that they're dealing with. So I started to help them. Eventually, I ended up at UBS. I ended up having Puffy as a client, a couple others, and it just started to grow from there. And their needs got bigger and more complex. And I was in the right place. I was at UBS, which I think is a great firm. Learned a lot about alternative investments, learned a lot about manager selection, Learned a lot about how to meet a client's needs and set investment policies. I took that business to Merrill Lynch, and then a couple of my clients came to me and said, Dan, I need someone that can take care of my household, my house. I have renovations, I have this. Well, don't you have a guy for that? Like, I'm the investment guy. I'm managing your investments. What do you want? Yeah, but this contract, we're not home. We're here, and this guy's coming over. I don't know what he's doing, and he says he may owe him this money. And, can you just deal with it? I'm like, listen, dude, I can't do that. I'm an investment person. You got to pay someone to do that sort of stuff. Yeah, but I don't know how to go. They said, but don't you have a business manager? Yeah, he doesn't know anything. So it's like, this is like over a 10-year, 15-year span now. So finally said, look, I don't care what Merrill Lynch pay you. I don't know what kind of assets you're managing. But if you would leave Merrill Lynch, I would completely let you just deal with everything.
If you manage home remodeling projects, you're now.
I'll bring you somebody. So I ended up having to form my own multi-family office because it wasn't just one family; it ended up being 3 families, and and it was a good business decision for me and for the families because it's costly, as these guys will tell you, to have a single family office and to have so many moving parts. It does become a full-time job, but for these clients in particular, because they don't like to be so hands-on, they really wanted to find someone they could trust, that could keep costs down. They just wanted to deal with one person, and it was simple for them. I did end up obviously outsourcing, remodeling projects, things like that, and dealing with payroll and taxes, accounting. It's just been fun. It's been great building a deeper personal relationship with them and with their families, their kids, and seeing these kids grow up and seeing them learn about finances and going out into the world and graduating from college. And so it's been very rewarding for me to see, some of these kids, you don't know how they're going to turn out. You're kind of shaking your head like, this is crazy. But they actually land well, so it's good to see that your involvement sort of helped with that.
Thanks so much, Daniel. Rob, thanks so much for coming up here. Glad we could make the schedule work. I think you had your own home remodeling thing this last year, right? You got a little bit, so glad to have you up. Please share a bit about your guys' story and kind of where you guys are today.
Yeah, in the interest of time, I'll keep it short so we can get to some of the questions. So, managing partner of Gentry Ventures, it's my family's single family office. And the origins of the Gentry Ventures family office come from a family company that still is owned and operated by my family. It's a communication hardware business for the aerospace and defense. So 5 years in the making now. Me and my 2 brothers have all been involved in operating roles. In terms of my personal experience, early in my career, I spent some time in investment banking up in Wall Street. I was also part of the Accenture or Anderson Consulting, Arthur Anderson divestiture, which is an interesting story at another date, but spent some time there. And that was early in my career. And then I spent a good 8-9 years actually scaling out my family company on the go-to-market side, building out the indirect and direct sales channel model. And then flash forward to about 2011, I left the family company and moved completely out to the West Coast and basically spent about the last 7 years in working for the Salesforce Marketo ecosystem for 2 different startups from like 0 to 10 million AR. And that led us to, in parallel, kind of organically get access to a lot of different deal flow than the traditional real estate stuff. And essentially and so we've been, Gentry Ventures as an entity has been around as a family office for 6 years, but full-time capacity I've been focusing on driving toward more clarity and investment thesis for just about the last year. So that's now a full-time thing for me. And I co-lead the investment strategy with my brother.
Excellent. Thanks, Rob. Marty, you've been around the block wearing a lot of hats across the family office communities. Talk a little bit about your perspective and getting involved and all the different hats you've worn and kind of where you see things going.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Midwest and started my career with E.F. Hutton out in Long Beach, California. But 2 years into my emerging youthful career, I got handpicked I was one of 3 people out of 6,000 advisors. They moved to New York, overworked me, overpromised me, but after 3 years, they let me have the pick of my choice in executive jobs around the country. So after training advisors not to be brokers, how to write investment policy statements, conduct third-party manager searches, use more of an institutional approach to compete with Mercer, SEI, that whole crowd. I had half my book of business was with some sort of trustee committee-driven accounts, whether they're foundations or corporate or endowments. I spent the other half with uber wealth families around the country and employing the same type of regimented process. We dominated the market at that time. So in 1990, I hung up my own shingle and I ran around the United States, Canada, and Europe and tried to indoctrinate the changing paradigm of Wall Street, which was moving from a commission to a fee, which was moving from self-directed into more of a third-party SMA type program. But with a lot of things, including the internet, discount brokerage, fee compressions, the list goes on and on and on. I've had to reinvent myself probably half a dozen times over the last 20 years. But early in '90, I started my own hedge fund with a former Morgan trader. And to be honest with you, after spending 38 years chasing alpha, I think it's a joke. Good luck to all of you. And so I'm a cynic, and I've moved from the right side to the left side of the brain. All I care about these days is your family. So if you've had 3 divorces, the more divorces you've had, the more children, the more grandchildren, the more fucked up they are, then I'm your guy. If you've got a really simple situation, I'm not your guy. But I have my own trust company I set up in St. Croix. There's a lot of congressional carve-out reasons I have it for cross-border clients. I work with people mostly in Europe and the United States, and I split my time between Lake Tahoe, Palm Beach, and St. Croix. And the only reason St. Croix is in there is because it's technically part of the U.S. We're not subject to OECD, CRS issues. And if you don't know anything about that, 192 countries are signatories, including Panama and Switzerland. So if your family's worth 20 million, no profile issues, no big deal. But if you're worth 200 million and you're subject to ransom, terrorism, kidnapping, whatever it might be in some of the uglier countries, the more that you've already shifted your monies over either to South Dakota or Nevada. And I currently represent under a white label or private labeling format 3 different trust companies in either South Dakota or Nevada. And there's a million reasons for asset protection, dynasty planning, a lot of things, but I'm now getting involved with the first digital trust company in the world, so I can affect smart contracts for origins of provenance for collectors and things like that. So basically, anything to do with what this day's been about, investments, I'm a fintech junkie. If they had a 12-step program, I'd be part of it. And so I do believe that you can synthesize or organizationally engineer a positive alpha outcome on illiquid assets. I do not believe you can do that with liquid assets, and the more it's in a public market, the more I'm cynical. And also, if you read any of the press, now we have the race to zero, whether it's fee compressions for wealth management advisors or whether it's zero basis points index funds through Fidelity or Schwab or whoever. The race to zero is not where I want to be hanging out 5 years from now. So if I can help you with your most precious assets, your wife, your husband, your mother, your father, your children, your grandchildren, and your legacies, and if I can appeal to that sense of your hubris or ego or philanthropic humanitarianism, whatever side you're on, that's where I get in and work in teams, whether it's with behavioral psychologists. I pay my dues as a public servant. I'm on the board of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and you'd be surprised that mental illness or addictions or certain affectations of a family member create much more of a glue or a bonding effect for me and my team, more than a transaction, more than a quarterly statement, more than a year. It creates an interesting dynamic that can go as long as 5, 10, 15 years, and you usually get invited to Gen 2's wedding. You usually have to clean up Gen 3's mess. You're just there for a lot of interesting issues. So I applaud all of you who are chasing alpha. If any of you can repeat it in a demonstrable, durable, consistent manner, love to see your deck. and your audited numbers, of course. But anyways, I sit in a very different perspective than a lot of people that just get involved in deal flow.
So there's a lot of cast of characters out there, family office communities, and across the board as it is in all of our careers and experiences. So we've got about a half hour left for questions. If you do have a question, please direct it to a panelist or two panelists, so we don't have everybody answer everything. We try and be a little more targeted. We do have the gold sheets here as well, so if you have interest and have a question, but you can't quite get to it today, please do check that on the gold sheet, and we'll make sure we get a chance to get those questions answered. But let's dive in with just a couple more quick things I think that'll help us to kind of set the stage here for some audience Q&A. We've talked a lot about kind of direct activities that our family offices invested in, things that support our direct investments or things we're involved with, and then there's all the indirect things that we're kind of not active with. And maybe just if each of us could share on the panel kind of how we work to use a family office to be able to kind of segment out and create some integrity between the things we're actively involved in investing and doing vis-a-vis the things that we're more passively involved in, I think would be a helpful kind of dynamic to share with the audience in each of our different experiences here.
Yeah, over the years, I have, I forgot to mention that the accountant that did my first tax return is now the fellow who is now running our technical family office and our trust. And the reason is that I file about 85 tax returns a year. And I was in the franchise business in a number of my companies. I gave this man all the franchisee business. He had about 3,000 clients. Called me up one day and said, I wanted to retire. And I said, like hell, it's not happening. I'm not doing 85 tax returns a year. So our compromise was that I hired him to run our trust, which is basically our family office. With his help, and he's a bright guy. He was my age. Now he's still my age. He's moved a lot of my active in business activities into more passive. So now we got about 60% of my balance sheet in passive, and for me, that is California real estate, multifamily apartment. I do it in syndications so that I'm not having to figure out what it is. I'm focused in California because California is, at this point, probably one of the most volatile states for real estate. And who knows, I may end up being an investor in a foreign country if it keeps going the way it's going. So with the state of California, I'm now into, probably about 200 different projects involving multifamily. 40% of my activities are still businesses that I am active in. I just literally I was an investor in a company called Store and Deliver. Great model, won't get into pitching it at all, but they really needed some focus, and as of a week ago, I am now the CEO of that company. And I like that kind of work, and it's what I do, and I like to have past active involvement. A lot of the companies I've exited out of, I'm still involved in companies here, the Costco business I'm still involved with here in Seattle, also similar enterprises in several states around the U.S. So I've been spreading most of my, pretty much all of my passive assets into real estate, with one exception. I did open a trading company, which is basically artificial intelligence based, that does it basically trades on its own. It has one employee, and he's basically a technician to run the computer. And so that's also very passive. And I did that because I went through a ton of brokers, paid a ton of fees, lost a lot of money, and said, I can lose this money just as easily myself for less a fee. So I did, and that's what we're doing, and turned it around. It is now slowing down because artificial intelligence, as you heard from Mark, does hit a wall. We're kind of at that point, so who knows where it goes. That's what I mean.
Thanks, Colin. Other panelists want to jump in on kind of passive versus active? Go
I can
down.
actually be really quick on this one. I will only invest directly in companies, in software startups, where I think my personal engagement with the entrepreneur can impact the outcome of the investment. Until last year, I still was managing my public equities portfolio with a Charles Schwab account because I'd had really good success doing that in the 90s and early 2000s, but I realized that I hadn't spent much time looking at that because I was so busy with the company, with the private companies I was working with, that I was not paying attention to my public equities portfolio. I'd made good choices and left them, so it was doing okay. But I finally last year, as part of setting my trust, decided to work with the broker that had handled the Salesforce account for me, who I'd given my foundation assets as just a project to see how the relationship would be. And he's now been my broker on my foundation account for 10 years. He's moved multiple times, different companies. I've built a relationship with him where I trust him to look after me. And he recently joined a multifamily office that's run by the son of the California Pizza Kitchen founder. So I moved my assets to that multifamily, my public equities portfolio. And I don't think I'll ever get back into public equities stock picking again. And I don't think I will ever put any money in any venture capital fund because that's what I do. And I joined Keiretsu because I think it may give me an opportunity to learn from angel investors with healthcare backgrounds or real estate backgrounds, which I don't have. And I think in terms of my portfolio, I ought to have some money in those areas as well. So I'm looking forward to my ongoing Keiretsu forum to begin to get some exposure to either find investors that I trust and trust my money to, or investors whose insights give me the confidence to make a direct investment alongside other Keiretsu investors in fields like me.
Thanks, Alan. Okay.
So many of the families in our group want to do some real impact investment because they have some family issues, especially in healthcare. So I was asked recently to find actively an investment in Alzheimer's. So far they haven't found one, but our group was able to, as a side effect, so to speak, get a donation for an Alzheimer's foundation in Dallas of $170,000. That was a nice little kind of on the side, not really anticipated, but I enjoyed that very much.
Yeah, so a lot of my clients, they're still learning a lot about just investing. I've obviously managed public market portfolios for years. That's my expertise, but I also have started to talk to the clients about liquid alternative investments. We spent some time talking about hedge funds, which I was totally against, because I just, the field was so crowded, and that something was going to happen, and it always does, just like with the real estate market 10 years ago. So we saw what happened to the hedge fund managers. But a lot of the managers I'm looking at now are, they're actively managed, they're not very liquid, which is sort of like an issue for some of the clients because they like to have their funds liquid. But we're looking to do small allocations. And so I'm actually trying to prepare just a platform of alternative investment managers that will be willing to work with some of my clients who are just learning to invest in alternative investments right now.
From our perspective, we're about 60% passive, 40% active. And from an active perspective, we're in growth mindset. So my brothers and I all have kids, so there's a third generation. My oldest niece is, in college. So we're thinking long term, but we're also in growth mode at the same time. So it's kind of a delicate balance. So we, over the last 5 years, have kind of figured out that we should swim in our lanes around being active and our domain expertise. So the natural one was real estate because we've been around it and it's evolved into a lot more sophisticated strategies around that. But then the other one would be around SMB hardware or software plays. So whether it's venture-backed or private companies, that's where we feel like we can be focused and have a clear thesis and mandate. And so we've started to, like Alan was talking about, like if I'm going to get involved on new technology companies coming to market. It's kind of where I can kind of have a pulse on what they're doing, and whether it's a direct investment or through a small single GP fund where I feel like I as an LP can add more value than just capital. So that's kind of how we've taken a look at it.
With me, I usually, even though I favor working with the family dynamics, it usually does start with an asset. And since I focused on family offices, trust companies, wealth management firms, and fintech, an example is I had a guy worth $2 billion that brought me into Scottsdale 5 years ago. He wrote a check for $27 million to buy a $2 billion AUM shop in New Jersey. We moved it to New York, didn't have non-competes. The CEO was good friends with the Richardson family of the Bixby Red Fortune, so they staked him, and within 18 months we saw a leakage of 75% of our AUM, so the $27 million check clearing was now probably worth a $7 million enterprise value. And what I do today, because I don't want those things to keep happening to people, I've got a team of about 35 subject matter experts around the United States and about a dozen around the world that range from cybersecurity to Internet of Things to CTOs, CEOs, any of the functional lines. And then they're all in their 50s and 60s. They don't want to work for a corporate company, and they definitely don't want a W-2. So they're happy if I push business to them. I get the family or the second gen, who's the operator sometimes, to take on isolated silo expertise to do the workout, clean it up, or protect it or move it on. And so I use the transaction, the workout, as a way, as a buffer to get to know Gen 1, 2, and 3. And then just because it's more of a passion than an economic multiplier, I really do like working with the family on their legacy. I think, at age 60, I know my mortality is ahead of me, and it means more for me to help with distressed assets. But I really want to move over to the family, so I try and play it both ways, but I have to have a team around me.
Anybody who's been involved in doing angel or early stage investing, I mean, the challenge is the deals that aren't working very well and the amount of time that they suck. And so I think also our family office structures help us to have a solution for those situations and have somebody to deal with those situations so we can continue to spend our time on our highest and best use where we can add value. And understanding, if we're going to do stuff in areas where we may not have a core expertise, there's a higher likelihood of those not working out, or if they are in a situation where they're not working out, there's not much we can do about it. So just another kind of element, I think, is a benefit that a lot of angels get bogged down in deals that aren't doing well, and there are solutions to those situations that'll kind of protect us from those negative situations. So I've got about 20 minutes left. We'll open it up for questions. We got all 8 mics up here, so I'll go ahead and run this one around if we have questions. We'll go ahead and get started here. Garrett, if you want to pass this back.
Oh, well, I guess I'd be interested to kind of hear different perspectives, but how much, some of the stuff that you guys have been talking about, especially from being a family office or working in an office, it seems ad hoc, or an opportunity or a deal flow is coming through. I'd love to hear how much future financial modeling are you guys doing for either internally for your family or for other families, and then how are those investment strategies either working with that model or going out like that? I think that for me, and I'm really interested to hear about how your strategies are working, looking to the future.
I'll jump in. So we're thinking about it a lot, actually, in the sense that for the last 4 or 5 years, we kind of organically got pulled into various types of alternative investments in healthcare, biotech, private equity, or kind of horizontal seed stage funds, or kind of traditional or small multifamily real estate investment funds. And so as we started to think about, okay, hey, we want to be thesis driven, we want to figure out how we can actually build maybe a portfolio of small businesses that complement our family company. We thought about this a lot, actually. It's like, okay, well, where are we today with this entity? So my family company is called Networks International, to clarify. Gen 3 Ventures is the family office. So there's capital there, it's been there, we've been putting it to work, but we laid out a 5-year plan of liquidity. What cash flow that's coming in from different investments, public and private. Then we looked at by asset allocation. Where do we have conviction? We like lots of singles and doubles. You know, we'll take singles and doubles all day. But because I have personal conviction and operating experience in software venture, okay, fine, we're going to dabble there. So what that led us to is capital call plan over the next 18 to 36 months. But then more importantly, capital commitments that we want to put more into the fund that would drive the investment strategy. And so it's a number of spreadsheets, and it's talked through, and it's slice and dice, but then you can actually, I think, I don't know if it was Amit or his partner, they were saying earlier, then you can tell your narrative to your story, back to what are you doing as a family office, and it becomes personal. Because we're certainly not a big fish, but we have conviction and clarity on what we're trying to do, and that story is equally important as just the capital. So that, hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, great comment. Any other quick comment?
I mean, just
Okay.
to add to what he's, basically, we do the same thing. I mean, basically, our process with each family is to do a plan, to see where all the assets are, to see how all things can work together. And, I mean, obviously, during this planning process, we're coming up with sort of the mission statement for the family, the investment policy for the family, what's going to be their tolerance, what are some of the values they want to pass on to their kids and their grandkids. How are they going to operate as a family with all this wealth, and when they're gone, how are the kids going to manage it? And then down the road, once those are established, there's a sort of like an education plan for those kids. We put them through a mini boot camp, and we send them away, and we as a multifamily also do things like that with the children, and work with other family members. So I guess in that process, sometimes there's extended cousins and uncles and people, and that they want to help get back and be involved. So we found a way for them to be involved. So that planning process is very important. And we generally just go back to, like we said, like five years. We try to go, we try to keep it as realistic as possible, and then set milestones down the road, benchmark.
Yeah, that journey, that interaction, whether it's investing or family, I mean, that is the whole thing. It's just having that dialogue and creating a positive thing.
I'm bifurcating. For those in the audience who take an ad hoc approach to it, I'll be the one that admits I do too. With my personal assets, I take a very instinctive, inspiration of the moment approach to making my decision, whether it's public equities or private, based on my past experience, and some conversation, some interaction will provoke an inspiration that I believe and take action on. And so for my personal investment, I'm quick, I'm instinctive, I'm inspirational, it would look ad hoc. But I believe that it produces good results. I may be wrong. But I've also been the founding general partner in 4 funds that invested, one of them in US startup companies, 3 in Japan. And with those, I surround myself with a team that's much more analytical. I'm comfortable with making decisions just on an instinctive moment, who bring a focus and a strategy and a rigor to it. So when I'm managing other people's money, I'm a part of a team where I've deliberately surrounded myself by people much more analytical and thoughtful and proactive and plan-oriented and portfolio structure-oriented. But my own personal investing would look very ad hoc to someone that's not me.
Let me add just one comment first, because I think Marty pretty much described the condition of my family. And so I've had to really kind of modify my thinking relative to next gen thinking. Half the family is doing okay, the other half are totally messed up. So I've had to look at it not so much from an asset point of view, but from a cash flow point of view. So we manage on a cash flow basis, and each asset is managed accordingly. But what I've had to do is I've had to set both short and long-term guidelines, setting milestones for people to, on behavioral basis, to be able to hit before they get to participate in any of the family opportunities. And as a result, what I've ended up doing is that I've taken 60% of the assets and funded them into philanthropic foundations. On Gen 1, my family's demise. and 40% is then split between the individuals that are hitting milestones and those that are not. And the ones that are not, I've made arrangements where they have sustainability in order to continue to function with their lives, and those that are have the ability to improve their lives through work and performance and having enough capital to be able to make a better lives for themselves. But the bulk of the assets are going to homeless kids, which I used to work here in Seattle in a homeless center for a couple of years. They're going to animals and rescue animals, which is a big passion of my wife. And they're going into philanthropic ideas and concepts that are health-based. And so that's where we've had to take our family situation. It's not everybody's, but it's working for us.
Marty, you had a quick comment?
Yeah, if any, this is just my perspective, but if any of you think whether some of the speakers or myself are dealing with, when I approach a family at the very onset, that this is somehow ad hoc, in my case it's quite the opposite. It's quite empirical, but you'll never know it. I employ a lot of cognitive and behavioral therapy tools. I do full 360 assessments. I speak with the matriarch or the patriarch, whoever is the survivor and driver. They typically are very alpha male-ish or even alpha female-ish, whatever. They had to be the driver. They grew up poor. No one was showing them how to get even a subway token, let alone a bus ticket, to junior college. And these people can also be brash, and I love these people because I kind of feel like they're my own. However, Gen 2 seems to be quite poised, and I'm not. So hopefully I catch a family before the Gen 1 dies off, otherwise I'm pretty much screwed. But if I get a chance to create some incubation time with the family dynamics, everything I do, and by the way, the last thing on my mind is a financial plan or a spreadsheet or modeling or thesis statements. I could give a shit about any of that stuff. If I'm talking to the mother and father, and then I get a chance to I ask them to just go away on a different day. I interview each of the 3 or 4 or 5 kids, each of the 7 or 8 or 9 grandkids, and I try and find out where they're coming from. What kind of upbringing do you feel you had? What are your hopes, dreams, and aspirations? Are you being allowed to pursue those? No, my dad's a tyrant. He wants me to keep running the body shop for the 5th goddamn generation, and I want to be a poet. So there's all kinds of things that you have to spend the first 30, 60, 90 days on, and then the next thing you do before you start building the house is make sure it's on a solid foundation. I invoke implicit, explicit, obvious, not so obvious governance, from a business governance and from a family governance. And I can find out from the children who wants to step up and be a part of ingratiating, embracing, indoctrinating governance. If you don't, then we're going to figure out a different life cycle for you. But if you want your family to ever survive the short sleeve syndrome, the 3-generation deal, and make it to the 4th or 5th, you've got to at least have 1 or 2 each generation people that will have high integrity, high commitment to whatever the family business was or could be. Because if it was in film, there's no reason they can't sell it and move over in another industry. So the only thing I wanted to make sure I get a close on the lid, none of my stuff is ad hoc. Each family's different, each person's like you, each of us are different. So there's a method to the madness, but you have to low-key it. You can't make people feel like they're being played or they're under any sort of weird diagnosis. You just need to do a full 360 assessment, come back to the family, and give your opinion on how to best lay out the future.
All right, I think Nampo's been waiting up in the back there. Our Korea chapter president is here with us. Go ahead. What question can we answer for you?
Okay, I'm from Waterstar Capital, so it's a venture capital. So I would like to learn what is the typical capital allocations for you guys for the cross-border or international allocations. Yeah, I mean 2 categories. One is for domestic American companies with international business access, and another one is purely just a foreign investment. And what would be the geography focusing for you guys? Thank you.
Somebody want to take that? Anybody with a little more international flavor?
I'm obviously half in Japan, half in the States, but I don't think that's such a personal thing. I'm not sure from it.
Our group has investors out of Europe and the United States, and you're asking about the sizes. Our group has written checks anywhere between $300,000 and about $20 million.
Martin?
I find it's the origin of the investor. If it's a non-American investor, like, even a Canadian, they're typically going to vacation at Turk and Caicos, not Scottsdale. They're typically going to invest in Europe and not have any issues with it. If you've got any folks in British Columbia or on the West Coast, certainly Seattle to San Francisco, you're going to have a lot of Asian comfort and familiarity with the metrics and access to capital. And if you're really wired, you even know how to get your money out of China, which is something you can't talk about publicly, but there are gray markets, there are back channels to get it to Singapore. And then a lot of those people might be looking for EB-5s or some sort of immigration through investment. But if it's an American, they typically are very American-centric, unless they just happen to trip over some sort of a spin-off or some sort of a carve-out that they needed to do a cross-border, like with Mexico is their idea of going international. But the Europeans and the Asians, they're much more global on how they're going to allocate direct investments.
Thanks, Marty. Other questions?
I have a question.
You have about 5 minutes left.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Ron.
So actually, it's funny you say that, Marty, about the first generation, Gen 1 patriarch, because my father fits that profile, and out of the three brothers, I guess I'm the one that would step up. But I actually wasn't the intention for me to join the family company back in whatever it was when I was leaving banking was 2002, whatever. Was more of a confluence of events, and we needed someone on the East Coast, and I was there to drive, whatever, so I was there. But in the reality was, I left the family company 9 years later because I saw an opportunity we should think about out of the box in a lot of different ways. But the whole family wasn't ready for it. So I moved to the West Coast, and then I did a whole bunch of different things. And then the interesting thing is, whether it was just dumb luck, or me just being, stubborn and kind of like, just, the middle child of kind of just constantly bugging the rest of the family. We all kind of had, an awareness, and well, it wasn't really formalized through a 360 review. We essentially came to those conclusions. And so I think he's right in that sense. Well, we did it in a very informal way, and we probably could learn from others. If we didn't go through that, I wouldn't be able to do the fancy spreadsheet. So I think that's a good point. So.
I have just a quick note on international. I happen to have lived a lifestyle that I've been able to acquire 4 citizenships. And so there is an ease of me to be able to make an investment internationally. And one of the mistakes I did make in my life was I actually moved my residency to the state of California. And little did I know, the sovereign nation of California decided a number of years ago that it was going to tax its residents on its global income. Which is, as I said, I was already filing 85 tax returns a year. So if I now have international investments and begin to spread into that market, that could easily go to 100 or more income tax filings a year, plus the complications of being probably audited by the state of California for international investment.
More aggressive than the IRS.
Yes, exactly. So, I would caution you on international investing that it's lucrative, it's fun, but, you really have to figure out where you live in this country to determine how that's going to affect your tax relationship. And if you happen to live or plan to live in the state of California, I do not recommend it.
There is one quick fix to that. You can live anywhere you want, including the sovereignty of California, whatever. It's where you establish and fund and title your trust and utilize a corporate trustee. So you could blow it, and you can quickly remedy it by setting up a South Dakota trust or Nevada trust, set up domestic asset protection issues. You can set up asset rings. You can do all kinds of things that exclude California by using a corporate trustee that because technically and legally, those assets are not yours anymore. They belong to a trust. It's funded in a different jurisdiction. you have a corporate trustee that operates in a different jurisdiction. This has risen all the way up to state Supreme Courts in 3 or 4 states, so there are remedies to it, even if you already think you made a mistake, so.
All right, excellent. Well, please join me in a round of applause and thank all of our family officers.